Hello, hello, my friends. Boy, do we have a show today. Welcome to our third week in August. And as part of our summer series, we are talking today about anxiety, but not just any anxiety. We're talking about a holistic approach to anxiety with Dr. Ellen Vora. And I know a lot of you have kids that are getting ready to go back to school, and this can be an anxiety-provoking time for so many of us, especially all of the parents out there that are sending their kiddos off to college. I know firsthand what that is like, and wow, anxiety and many, many, many other emotions start to creep up during this time. So I thought you all would really, really appreciate this show today, and you loved it the first time around. So here we go again with a holistic approach to anxiety with Dr. Ellen Vora. Hi, I'm Michelle Chalfant, psychotherapist, holistic life coach, and human just like you, learning to navigate life's challenges. With over 25 years experience, I teach people how to get healthy using the adult chair model. The adult chair model is where simple psychology meets grounded spirituality, and it teaches us how to become healthy adults. From anxiety and depression to codependency and relationship issues, you can use the adult chair for just about anything. Each week, I share practical tips, tools, and advice from myself and a wide range of experts on how to get unstuck, how to live authentically, and how to truly love yourself, all while sitting in your adult chair. Welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast. I am Michelle Chalfant. I'm delighted to be here with you. Today, we're talking all about anxiety with Dr. Ellen Vora. Actually, we're talking about the anatomy of anxiety. We had a great conversation around what anxiety is, how you move through anxiety. And she's got something called true anxiety and false anxiety, which was really, really interesting. We got into a little bit about spirituality and psychedelics. I'm telling you, had a big conversation all around anxiety. I think you're going to really love this show. Let me tell you a little bit more about Dr. Ellen Vora. She is a board-certified psychiatrist, acupuncturist, and yoga teacher, and she's the author of the best-selling book, The Anatomy of Anxiety. She takes a functional medicine approach to mental health, considering the whole person and addressing imbalance at the root. Dr. Vora received her BA from Yale University and her MD from Columbia University. It is with great pleasure that I welcome to the show Dr. Ellen Vora. So welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast, Dr. Ellen Vora.
Thank you, Michelle. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you on to talk about such an important topic, anxiety. And I actually wrote a book. I'm writing another book right now. And it was interesting. I wrote a book a few years ago on the adult chair. And I remember one of the topics that I researched was anxiety. And I don't remember, in doing my research, it came up that anxiety was one of the top hits on Google. This is, I can't remember what year the book came out, 2015 maybe. And I'm writing another book right now. And I just did research like a week or so ago. And again, it is the top of Google searches. So clearly it's a much needed topic or conversation to have around what the heck is going on. And I know this is one of your expertise. So again, thank you for being on, and thank you for researching and doing so much work around this topic, because clearly it's needed. Clearly it's needed. So tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you fell into this idea of writing a book on anxiety.
Sure. So I'm a psychiatrist, but in particular, I call myself a holistic psychiatrist because I take a very full body approach to mental health. I think about the full portrait of my patients' lives, not just what's happening from the neck up and only focused on their brain chemistry or their thoughts or their behaviors, but I'm really interested in how are they sleeping? How are they nourishing themselves? How is their digestive tract functioning? Are they moving their bodies? Are they inflamed? But then also more psychospiritual dimensions of mental health, like do they feel held by community? And are they
Mm.
connected to nature? Are they being of service in their lives? Do they feel a sense of meaning and purpose? So to me, these are the real determinants of our mental health. It doesn't negate the fact that our brain chemistry, our genes, our thoughts, our behaviors, they play a role, but it's not the whole story. And I just like to broaden that scope and make sure we're addressing it from every angle. And I wrote a book about anxiety because I saw the need. Just like you, I
Mm.
was sort of taking the temperature of our society, and the temperature right now is anxiety. That
Yeah.
is where people are feeling most, that's how they're subjectively describing their imbalance and their suffering.
So what do you think is causing that? Like, what is causing the epidemic of anxiety?
Yeah. So, I mean, I attempt to answer that question. It took me about 250 pages, but I'm going to summarize it
Summarize it.
slightly more concisely. I think the way I think about anxiety, I separate it into two categories: what I call false or avoidable or physical anxiety. It's the kind of
Mhm.
anxiety, and this is somewhat of a new idea that I'm really hoping helps people find a through line to hope and to feel a little bit more empowered and reduce their suffering. False
Mhm.
anxiety is anxiety that is not our true essence. It's not our inner compass. It's just unnecessary suffering
Mm.
created by a stress response in the body. And that stress response is itself caused by some state of physiological imbalance, which in our modern lives is really common. So if we're
Mm.
sleep deprived, if we're having a blood sugar crash, if we're hungover, if we're over caffeinated, if we're inflamed, all of this can generate a stress response in the body, which tracks up to the brain and creates that subjective experience of anxiety. And it's unnecessary suffering.
That's so true. And I love that you are holistic. I am as well. And I think that's so important because it's not just one thing, that we have to look at. And it could be that you're having an intolerance to a food. It
Yeah.
could be, like you said, I mean, how many humans drink caffeine? The thing is, though, is that people will drink a caffeinated beverage or eat a certain food. And if that anxiety response isn't happening immediately, they're not linking it together. They're not saying, oh, it must be because of this or this. So I love that you take a holistic approach. And sleep. I mean, oh my gosh. I talk to more people that don't get enough sleep than people that get enough sleep. I don't, do you find that?
That's exactly right. And we also know we have data
Mm.
that tells us that as a species, we're sleeping less these days than we did
Yeah.
a handful of decades before. And I think you're also exactly right that we are only, our understanding of what's making us anxious is only as good as how correlated that time scale is. And if something makes us feel anxious right away, we know to attribute our anxiety to that. But so many of these things operate with a lag, with a little bit of a delay. And so we don't think to attribute our anxiety to our caffeine or our sleep deprivation. These
Yeah.
things are also really common. And,
Mhm.
it's an important caveat. There is no shame or blame around any of these behaviors. These are common, these are normal. They just happen to pinball our physiology and
Mhm.
generate a lot of stress responses. And we're also given a story right now around anxiety, which is that, like all
Mhm.
mental health conditions, that it's a result of a genetic chemical imbalance.
Mhm.
And so if the story were to change and we would help people know, sure, your genes play a role, but as we say in functional medicine, genes loads the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger.
Ooh, that's
And
good.
and if we had a narrative around the fact that
Mhm.
caffeine can generate a stress response, sleep deprivation contributes to anxiety across a number of different pathways. Here's how alcohol impacts your neurotransmitter function in your brain. If we had that conversation, we would
Mhm.
find it easier to attribute our anxiety to these physical causes. But for now, it's more of a one woman army fighting against a very different story. And I have nothing against the conventional story that we have, but
Yeah.
it's just that it's our least hopeful narrative around mental health. Genes plays a role, but
Mhm.
that keeps a lot of us feeling stuck and feeling destined to be anxious.
Mm.
And it plays a role, but it's more dynamic than we appreciate. We have an epigenetic phenomena. We our genes are plastic. They're in a dynamic relationship with the environment. And I
Mhm.
prefer to focus on all the things we can do to support ourselves feeling better.
And the thing is, because of epigenetics and what we know about this, the genes can turn on, but we can turn them off,
Yes, that's
right?
right. It's a
And
growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset.
yeah, for sure. What do you find is and maybe it's a whole bunch of reasons, but are you finding that there is like one common reason or the most popular reason that people are suffering from anxiety? Or is it truly like across the board?
So, within the realm of false anxiety, which we'll get
Mhm.
to true anxiety in a
Yeah.
moment, but
Yeah. Yeah.
within the realm of false anxiety, I would say biggies that I'm seeing a lot of. I do think sleep deprivation is kind of a sleeper cause of anxiety. It's one that we're
Hmm.
not pointing to. Some
Hmm.
people don't realize how important it is. Plenty of people realize how important it is, but it still eludes them. Even if we prioritize sleep, it's still hard to know how to set yourself up for good sleep. And so it's one of my favorite ways to support people is to get them sleeping well.
And
Blood
tell,
sugar is another really common one.
wait, and I want to hear your list, but as long as we're on sleep, if I may, just
Yeah.
ask you a question, because I'm thinking people are asking themselves, well, how many hours of sleep should I be getting a night?
Yeah. So I think of this, I heard this once 10 years ago. I don't know who to attribute it to, but I heard someone describe it as a sleep shoe size. So we
Mm.
know from
Hmm.
research that humans exist on this bell curve where we all need within 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And if you need
Hmm.
less than 7 or more than 9, that's, approaching 2 standard deviations away from the mean. It's not very common. Plenty of people are consistently getting less than 7 hours of sleep, but most people need at the minimum 7 to 9. But within that, what's the right amount for each one of us? It's not exactly like it's just a menu and you're picking and you're like, you know
Hmm.
what, I'll take the 7, please. Like that
Yeah.
sounds fun to need less sleep, but it's something unique to our constitution. So we have to know for ourselves, am I an 8 hour a night person? Am I actually a 9 hour a night person? And if you are someone who needs a little bit more sleep, like 9 hours of sleep, to really embrace that and to protect it fiercely and unapologetically. And I love the analogy extended to this, where if you had a size 9 shoe and you walked around all day, every day in size 7 shoes, it would hurt. And I
Yeah.
think we're doing the same thing to our
Yeah.
bodies, to our brains, when we're not getting the amount of sleep our bodies need.
So true. I am an Aura ring wearer.
Mhm.
There is nothing that I cherish more. And I should say, like, I protect my sleep. I am like, okay, I will go to bed at 9:30 so I can wake up at 6. I make sure that when I get 8.5 hours, I am golden. And I know that about myself. And I talk to people that go, I only need 5 hours. I'm like, I don't believe it, because we need at least 7. Like, I don't believe that you can function without maybe something else going off inside your body that maybe isn't so healthy. But again, it doesn't show up immediately, right?
And it all depends on what do we mean by need. Somebody can be in a habit of getting 5 hours of sleep and they're awake during the day with a lot of coffee. They're functioning, but the
Mhm.
data really doesn't lie. And it shows us that when we are getting sufficient sleep, we have reduced cardiovascular risk, reduced risk of dementia. We
Right.
have more kindness, patience, creativity. We're better at creative problem solving of complex problems. We have better empathy.
Mhm.
We're less likely to die with traffic accident fatalities. And we have, in my biased opinion, most importantly, better mental health across the board,
Definitely.
decreased rates of anxiety, depression, bipolar, ADHD. And we are often focused on the other side of that. We say, well, I'm not sleeping well. It's my anxiety or it's the depression affecting the sleep. And that is true, but it's bi-directional. And I think the easier entry point, the easier part of that to fix is support the sleep and the depression and the anxiety improve.
Wow. I love that. You're so right. I've heard clients over the years say to me, well, I don't sleep really well because I'm so anxious.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, flip it.
Yeah. It works both
Perhaps.
ways.
Yeah, I never thought about that. It's so, oh my gosh, that was okay. Thank you for that. Thank you
Yeah.
for that on sleep. You went into blood sugar. So talk about that.
Yeah, so that's another one that I see that's a very common cause of false anxiety. In the
Mhm.
modern American diet, we are eating a diet of refined carbohydrates and coffee drinks that are secretly milkshakes and rosé all day. So we're on a blood
2,000
sugar roller
calories
coaster.
and yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen
And
the big ones at Starbucks. They're like gigantic, like, oh my gosh.
and it's marketed to children.
Yeah.
And so we are on a blood sugar roller coaster.
Yeah.
And this is the design of the body because through millennia of human evolution, having enough to eat was a matter of life or death. So a
Mhm.
blood sugar crash comes with a series of checks and balances. When our blood sugar spikes, insulin chases it, that causes our blood sugar to crash. This then induces a stress response in the body.
Mm.
That's how we cue the liver to break down the storage of starch that it keeps. It's what gives us a sense of urgency. Go find something to eat. But it just happens to have as a side effect a 5 alarm fire stress response in the body. So a lot of us are in and out of blood sugar crash induced stress responses that feel synonymous with what we call panic or generalized anxiety. And so we're going in and out of this anxiety and we forget to attribute it to our blood sugar. So we
Mm.
just feel doom and gloom. Everything feels overwhelming and terrible. And actually, in that moment, it's not to say our problems aren't real. Our problems,
Mhm.
our stressors are still valid. It's just that if we had a snack and our blood sugar was stable in that moment, we would be more resilient in the face of our stressors. And it's just
Mm.
important to recognize the role that our mind plays in this process because our mind is the consummate meaning maker. And when our physical body is thrown into a stress response, our sweet little mind attempts to make sense of this, what is first and foremost a physical sensation. So it
Mm.
tells us a story and it says, well, the reason I'm stressed right now is what's going on at the office and this interpersonal dynamic that feels uneasy. And it'll tell us a story to make sense of it. But that's always a retrofitted justification. The problems are real, but this is first and foremost a physical issue. And we can address it at the level of the physical. And then that just makes us more resilient in the face of our very real stressors and problems.
Mm. Again, it's with the blood. And I know I've worn the what's it called? The monitor for the blood sugar.
Like a
The
continuous
glucose
glucose
monitor.
monitor.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
continuous glucose monitor. Holy moly. It was eye-opening. And I had a sense, like I'm very sensitive to food in general. My body is sensitive, like so, but it was shocking to look at the chart on my phone that when I would eat, it was crazy, like a little bowl of oatmeal. Holy crap, I would just right off the chart and then crash and get tired. Like that was obvious, but what was fun was to add like a little bit of nut butter, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, that's not so bad. Or have a handful of almonds before. I was like, insane. But again, most people I don't think link
Yeah.
blood sugar or, hey, I'm going to go have that big Starbucks coffee or whatever the heck they're drinking. And then an hour later, they're anxious or have fatigue and they don't understand why. It's like, it's blood sugar.
It's
They don't
amazing
know.
to think about. Like, I have a 7-year-old daughter, and she has a science unit in school, and they're planting a little lima bean and growing a little plant. I'm like, oh man, if they could all just wear CGMs and add
Yeah.
almond butter to their oatmeal and see this right before their eyes. Because
Yeah.
it's really empowering information because
Yeah.
it's not like we have to dramatically change everything that we do, but we just want to make informed choices. And
Hmm.
let's say we want to
Hmm.
have the piece of fruit, we want to have the oatmeal. Okay. But if we add something that's more pertinacious and with fat, then it's slower
Hmm.
to digest, slower to be released into our bloodstream, and it blunts the curve. So rather than a
Mm.
spike and a drop, we're on a much more gradual roller coaster ride. And it makes a big difference in how we feel.
Yeah. So good. Anything else? Or are those the top two? Would you say the sleep and the blood sugar? Those are the
So
top.
many more things, but I
I
would say
know.
the big hitters, inflammation is big, digestive
Yeah,
issues are big, and then nobody's favorite conversation is the one around caffeine and alcohol,
I
but
know.
they play a role.
I know. Yeah, they definitely do. Talk about okay, so you talked about the false anxiety.
Yeah.
What's true anxiety? What is the difference there?
Yeah, so it's really in stark contrast to false anxiety, where false anxiety is avoidable, it's based in the physical body. True anxiety is purposeful anxiety. It's
Mm.
not something to pathologize, it's not something to suppress. we don't get to gluten-free or decaf coffee our way out of our true anxiety. And I think really importantly, true anxiety is not what's wrong with us. And in many ways, it's what's right with us when
Mm,
we are able to viscerally connect to what's not right in the world. So this is our inner compass. It's nudging us to slow down, to get still, and to pay attention to what we secretly know underneath is not okay. And that
mm,
could be in our personal lives, it could be a job, it could be a relationship, it could be in our communities, or even in the world at large. And so, with true anxiety, once we listen to it and honor the communication that it carries, we can translate that feeling of anxiety into purposeful action. And then we don't feel quite so mired in that
mm.
anxious feeling.
So that's true anxiety
Mm.
where it's actual, and this is my whole take on anxiety. I want to run it by you.
Yes.
Um, this dawned on me after seeing clients for 20 some years. I would listen to people with anxiety and I realized anxiety is not an emotion to me. And I thought, because I'd ask all my clients, like, how do you know you have anxiety? How do you know you have anxiety? And it was the same kind of physical symptoms, right? Well, I've got knots in my stomach, or my heart is racing, or my thoughts are racing. And I thought, huh. So what I started doing with my clients was teaching them how to sit with their emotions and what they're feeling and looking at what's going on in your world. Oh, well, I'm, you know, separating from my partner, or I'm moving across country, leaving my family. Okay, how does that make you feel? And I'm telling you, I would have my clients sit in their bodies and feel what was going on, and their physical symptoms would start to change just by getting in touch with what they were feeling. So my definition of anxiety is um, the physical manifestation of unfelt emotions.
Say it again.
It's the physical manifestation of unfelt emotions,
Oh, I
right?
love this. I love this. And
Right?
talk about things I wish we could teach kids in school.
Oh, yes. And that is my mission with the adult chair. Let me tell you what, we have a coaching program. I'm getting coaches in schools to teach children teach teachers and children how to feel their emotions. We need this at a very early age, but that's another topic.
There's an
But
author named
yes.
Mark Brackett who's doing beautiful work
Ooh,
around this. He wrote a book called
really?
Permission to Feel, and
Ooh,
he
I love
teaches
that.
kids emotional literacy and how to have an expanded vocabulary to identify the ways that we're feeling. I remember a patient once told me, she said she felt like her sessions with me were actually couples therapy between her and her body. And it
Oh,
was a big unlock for me to realize part of what we're doing is just opening up those lines of communication, because our conscious mind is going about our days. There's no blame here. Like, we have a
mhm.
lot to handle. A lot of things are coming
Yeah.
down the pipeline at us, and we're just Lucille Ball with the chocolates coming down the conveyor belt. We're just doing our best to handle things as it's coming at us. That's a
Mhm.
deep and old school reference that might not
Yeah.
pertain to most
I
people
know.
listening. Okay. But then
Yeah.
it's our body that's
Yeah.
able to listen, and really dial in and tap into a deeper knowing. And
Mhm.
sometimes it has an important communication for us. But when do we get the time
Mm.
to drop in and say, okay, body, tell me what you know right now? And so we just need a practice for saying, hey, body, you've been tapping me on the shoulder. Let's talk.
Yeah. It's turning toward the anxiety instead of turning away from, and picking this thing up, the cell phone,
Mm.
and getting on social media and getting on and it's like we need to learn how to take breaks and slow down so
Yeah.
we can check in. And anxiety is it's an internal job of working with it versus external. I think so many humans, we reach outside of ourselves to quote unquote fix us, right? Or feel better, in some way. And it doesn't end it. We've got to get to the root. So you mentioned sleep, you mentioned blood sugar. Talk about scrolling on your phones at night and how is it relevant also to anxiety? Yeah.
It's
Or day. Why bother talking about it at night? Because day or night, with the comparison that we do, how does it affect anxiety and how we feel?
in 50 different ways. And let me highlight maybe two or three.
Yeah.
Even if we're just looking at evening scrolling, there's a
Mhm.
couple of things going on there.
Mhm.
One is that it's emitting blue spectrum light, which is suppressing our melatonin and making it difficult to fall asleep. It is also, by definition, stimulating, excitatory. And so it makes it very difficult to feel bored enough or safe enough to surrender into a state of sleep. And when we're doom scrolling in particular, this modern American pastime, we feel surrounded by danger. And that's a really incompatible state with what it takes for us to surrender into the vulnerable state of sleep. That's
Mhm.
nighttime scrolling. But then during the day, I think it is just important to recognize, even if we're putting aside the more common conversation around compare and despair and the fact that social media is really conducive to relational aggression because there is no accountability, because we are so limited in our character size, because we all have so much angst and we need an outlet. And so we're taking it out on each other in this medium. And I think that actually impacts. I mean, the data says that impacts females more than males. I
Mhm.
think that has to do with some evolutionary underpinnings for the ways we need to interpersonally coordinate and be effective in relationships. So when we feel surrounded by relational aggression, it leaves us feeling even more uneasy if we are women. All
Mm.
this said, I think the most powerful takeaway is just to recognize we are living in what's called the attentional economy or the
Mm.
attention economy, which is to say, our attention is the commodity being competed for by really smart companies. And they know their neuroscience, they know their behavioral psychology. They know that if they prey on our fear response or instill uncertainty or doubt or controversy, we will rubberneck. We will hand over an increasingly large share of our attention. They get more clicks, they get more ad revenue, they're the big winners, but it's our mental health that is the collateral damage. So we just need to recognize the onus, unfortunately, is on us. We need to navigate the information landscape, eyes wide open, conscious, and from a perspective of self love. How do
Mm.
we stay informed and stay a part of the conversation, but choosing who gets to tell us what and in what way and how often and at what time of day so that we're still protecting our energy and our well being?
Mm. That's so good. It's so true about everything that you said about social. And I find it kind of scary, I have to say, that if I'm having a conversation and my cell phone is somewhere nearby, I'm talking to someone in my house or at a restaurant or something, like the next day, even if I'm on Google, ads for what I was talking about that day before start popping up on my phone. It's like Big Brother. It's very, my mother was over, I don't know, like a month or so ago. And she was like, I can't hear you. She goes, I don't know, maybe I need a hearing aid. I'm like, oh, mom, stop it. And she started talking about a hearing aid. I'm like, that's you don't need, not yet. Maybe I do. Da, 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 da. The next day, I still get them. I'm looking at the weather forecast today. There's an ad for a hearing aid. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
So that's terrifying. So you think about conversations that everybody has with their phone right here. Again, it lures us in and we get this, it's like psychologically trapped in the phone. It's like
Yeah.
all these ads. It's relevant to what we talk about, relevant to what we're clicking on and liking. It's like it traps us, and of course, it's going to crank up our anxiety. And
Yeah. It's
oh,
something I call the banality of fear, sort of a play
mm,
on that banality of evil, where in certain ways, part of why we're all so anxious these days is that advertisers have figured out that, we always knew sex sells, but we also know now that fear sells.
mhm,
And for not a deep nefarious reason, but just because marketers are trying to sell us something that we usually don't need. They are bathing us in a soup of fear all the
mhm.
time.
Yeah.
And I think it's a big approach I take to mental health, overall well-being in general. It's helpful to recognize that some of the most successful companies, the reason they're successful is they have figured out how to addict human beings to what they're
Yes.
selling.
Yeah.
And social media is no exception, everything about the phone. And so I think it doesn't mean we have to never engage with addictive substances. If social media is your thing, or caffeine, or alcohol, or video games, or porn, or whatever it is, I just want to arm people with the knowledge that this is addictive and here's why.
Hmm.
And if you still decide to make a proactive, self loving choice to engage with this substance, can you do it from a place of freedom and or are you doing it unconsciously?
So true. Are you choosing it?
Yeah,
And really being mindful with what you're doing, when you're doing it, and how long. Well, I think when we're mindful and we bring consciousness in, it's a game changer.
that's
It's a
right.
game changer. Because if we're really present in the body when we are, let's say, scrolling through social, um, eventually there is that feeling, that tightness or that headache that comes on. And if we're tuning into that, that's that indicator like, okay, I'm done. And that's we got to put that phone down and walk away. But that's really staying connected to the body so that we're in tune with it. So we don't walk away with anxiety, right?
It's
Yeah.
beautifully said.
Thank you. Okay. So let's talk about how does spirituality figure into anxiety management?
So, not something that I was taught in medical school or psychiatry residency. As a
Uh-huh.
field, we're squeamish around this topic. We don't talk about it with our patients. It slowly dawned on me that I was doing my patients a disservice here. And I think within the realm of true anxiety, some aspects of true anxiety can be more mundane, smaller beans. Like it can be, maybe we do need to change careers. Maybe we do need to get out of that relationship. Maybe we do need to start setting boundaries or connecting to nature or being of service.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's the heavy duty true anxiety, which is really the inherent fragility of walking this earth in a human body and loving others who also share that vulnerability. It's the
Mm-hmm.
fact that we will one day die, that we will lose the people that we love. And,
Mm-hmm.
that's something we actually have to grapple with. We don't get to just ignore that. And I think that spirituality, which is to not to say, I have a horse in this race. Like, I'm not here to say, here's what your conclusion should be. Here's what is the truth. I certainly don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to just for us all to remind ourselves and give ourselves permission to seek, to ask the bigger questions,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what answer we arrive at, to just be
Right.
giving ourselves permission to say, like, what the heck is this human experience? And I find that when I touch for lack of if I don't have buy in on this concept, I will alienate some people right now. But the
Mm-hmm.
magic of the universe, when I
Yeah.
experience transcendence,
Mm-hmm.
for me, that pulls back the veil ever so slightly and reveals this possibility that perhaps there is something vastly beyond my comprehension occurring here.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that that softens the edges of that deepest true anxiety, that
Mm.
it allows me to arrive at a stance of just flirting with trust and surrender to
Mm-hmm.
the challenges in the unfolding of
Mm.
this human experience.
Beautifully said. I love that.
Mm.
Love that. Um, okay. Being a psychiatrist, I would love your opinion about psychedelics and anxiety.
Yeah. So we move fast these days. And only a few years ago, it was like psychedelics, the great white hope. And now we're
Exactly.
already we were in the Renaissance and now we're already in the pendulum swing of like, this was hyped up and, it's
Yes.
not the cure all. And it's like, well, nothing was ever going to be the cure all.
Mm-hmm.
To me, my field, psychiatry, is in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And we are finally coming to terms with the fact a big paper came out last summer that there is no basis for the serotonin theory of depression. There never was. It was always just a way we were making sense of an effect that we saw with certain medications in
Mm-hmm.
certain people. But
Mm.
when we really study our antidepressants, our SSRIs, they're not separating from placebo in mild to moderate depression, but they
Mm.
are in severe depression. So, what explains that?
Mm-hmm.
And they're really only effective in about 15% of people that take them. So we need a broader menu of offerings. This,
Mm-hmm.
when it helps people, this is great. Every victory is a success. Hallelujah. I'm in the business
Mm-hmm.
of decreasing human suffering. When
Right.
meds are somebody's path up the mountain to healing, terrific. I'm not here to say there's anything wrong with that. I'm here to say for the other millions of people for whom that wasn't satisfactory and that hasn't actually resolved their symptoms in an effective way,
Mm-hmm.
just don't want them to despair. I think psychedelics are a promising new line of treatment for mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And For some people, they are a really good path up that mountain of healing. For other people, they're outright contraindicated.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone else, they might just not resonate. But
Mm-hmm.
really importantly, it's not really like we take a pill and we fix the biochemistry.
Mm-hmm.
It's not quite like that. I think that what it does is it facilitates integration work, which then allows us to make changes, which it's those changes
Mm-hmm.
and those new insights and those new framings and the new habits that can come with that integration work that really make the difference. So it's not like you have one big experience, you're like, oh my God, this changes everything. You'll go right back into your old habits and
Mm-hmm.
patterns.
Yep.
But if you do give yourself the gift of integrating that experience and drawing on those insights and galvanizing them and putting them into practice, I think you can really benefit from this work if it's not contraindicated for you.
I could not agree more with you on this. And the word that you used many times is integration. Um, I've learned and done a lot of studying. I've asked a lot of people questions around this topic. Um, it terrified me, to be honest with you, about maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago when I started hearing more and more people talk about this. I was like, but that's a drug. No way. I don't do drugs. I don't even hardly drink alcohol, let alone do a psychedelic. Um, and I decided to do a lot of research on my own. And when I really delved into it, and of course, it's started coming online, I don't know how many years ago in our world, in the therapy world and psychiatry, like you started
Over the
hearing more
last
about it.
5 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
over the last 5 years or so. Um, but I really was scared by them until I started learning more. And the more I learned, the more curious I became. And then people very close to my circle started experimenting and working in a therapeutic way with these things. And holy moly, the results were mind-boggling to me. And what I have learned over the years, and I too have also done some various psychedelics, and what I have found is it's all about the integration. This is not a quick fix. This is not something that you do once. It's not a magic pill, but what you can experience during a psychedelic experience or a journey is like nothing of this world. It's nothing like this world. And again, we could go on for 3 hours about this topic, but coming back from that journey, and I liken it to, or I don't liken it to, like drinking and heroin and cocaine and drugs, like those take you high or low, where a psychedelic takes you sideways. It's like this. It's like there's no high or low here, folks. Like you are in another dimension, and you are maybe speaking with angelic beings, your spirit guides. God, I feel like I've touched the experience of God, and it's an experience. It's not a human with a beard. It's an experience of this unconditionally loving source that gave me some of the most unbelievable information on my life. No one else would ever know this. I personally didn't know it. And you've got to come back from that and take months and months, and you integrate that into your life. You process it, you journal about it. And that's how it makes an incredible impact on your life. So I'm glad to hear you say all this.
I think you wisely segued to this straight from our conversation about spirituality, because I do find that when
Yeah.
indicated, when appropriate, this is one pathway to
Mm-hmm.
seek in that way that can soften the edge around true anxiety. And I
Yeah.
think if it's helpful to bring just a little bit of the mechanism for why psychedelics can be helpful in these ways, it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting to me in my mind. I structure it as there are some physical, neuroscientific, biochemical ways that it's helpful. Like we know that there's this increase in something called BDNF, or brain derived neurotrophic factor, which
Mm-hmm.
helps us with neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, which is
Mm-hmm.
still kind of worth translating into English, which it helps us grow and change and adapt. And that can be really powerful if we're stuck, if we're entrenched, if there's trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But then it can be anti-inflammatory. It can quiet the default mode network. It can be active on our serotonin receptors, the 5-HT2A receptors, which I just said that theory of depression is debunked, but there seems to be some common thread here around our mood and our serotonergic activity.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that to me, what's most interesting about how or why these medicines can be helpful is something called the mystical experience hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows us that the degree to which someone has a peak mystical experience in a ceremony, that is actually will correlate with the antidepressant effect and even in how enduring that antidepressant effect is.
Mm-hmm.
So this is
Mm-hmm.
very different from our SSRIs, where an SSRI is not giving you what Jason Silva calls reverse PTSD, a state of awe that can really even just change
Mm-hmm.
your outlook on life. But it, to me, this is best summarized by what my colleague Will Su says. He says psychedelics are not just tools for healing trauma, they are agents for making spirituality palatable to our starving Western world.
Mm.
So to me, that's what's most exciting about this new way of thinking about how do we support a brain that is struggling.
Yeah. Well, and the studies that are coming out, even on microdosing with anxiety specifically, they're so impressive.
Yeah.
So impressive. I've done some microdosing. I know people in my circle have done the same. And I know people that have had anxiety for years that started to do that. And I mean, they don't have it anymore. Like it's
Yeah.
just, it's miracle after miracle. I'm like, wow, not everybody. I get it. It's not for everybody. But being a therapist for 25 years now and having clients that have had anxiety and depression and many things and they're on meds for it and they're just not working like you said, like they're just not, or it's working with side effects. I'm like,
Right.
oh, I wish we had something else. So when this came online, I was again initially terrified, but now it's quite promising and it's pretty exciting where we're going in our world, being in the therapy kind of world, because I really think we're going to make some big changes in the world using these things with
I
clients and
agree.
patients. So yeah,
It's
it's
interesting.
exciting.
It's interesting you use the word miracle, which,
Yeah.
you think about a miracle and it's like, well, that defies logic. That's not something that we can account for with our material understanding of this existence. And I think it's anytime we see someone with chronic entrenched anxiety, depression,
Mm,
and suddenly they're feeling much better and even calling into question that diagnosis, it feels like a miracle. But I think what is actually occurring here is that we need to change our narrative of what is
mm,
materially possible. And
yeah.
we've come of age with the presiding consensus around mental health, which is it's a genetic chemical imbalance, it's a destiny. We're
Mhm,
broken, we're stuck. But there are medications that can fix that. And I think we need a really different paradigm to
mhm,
understand that genetic predisposition plays a role for sure, but
mhm,
it's not the whole story. There are
mhm,
all these other determinants of our mental health, and we're never stuck. We are never broken. And I just want people to start to try on for size this more hopeful, more empowering narrative, which is to say, this is all more plastic than we've been taught to believe. There's a lot that we can do that can change the outcome. And why focus so much on our brokenness when we can focus on the fact that we are inherently whole, but here's some ways that we need to be supported.
mm. Beautifully said. I agree. Thank you for that. What you have some views on sunshine and anxiety.
I
Tell us about that.
get myself into trouble with
Yeah,
this
let's
one.
hear it.
Yeah.
I'm ready to I'm going to talk to you about this. Let's hear what you have to say. I might agree
Yes.
or disagree. I'm not
So
sure.
let's have a real conversation about.
Let's
I'm
have
up
it
to
out.
changing my mind. Yeah. So I think we got sunshine wrong, and I'm
Mm,
sort of introducing a different swing of the pendulum, but maybe where we land is somewhere in between.
mm.
But basically, we've been taught for some time now that we need to protect ourselves from the harmful rays of the sun
Oh.
and that it causes skin cancer. And
Mhm,
as per usual with the human body, the story is so much more complicated.
mhm,
And it's not one size fits all. Our risk of skin cancer depends on how melanated our skin is, on our family history, even on our own personal history of sunburns, but also even on what we're eating is going to play a role, and even weirdly on things like our sun exposure and our vitamin D levels. So it's a bunny hop. And we just always need to understand the trade offs that when we are avoiding the sun, we might be protecting ourselves from certain skin cancers, but sometimes at a cost of vitamin D deficiency and how that can impact our immune health, our osteoporosis risk, our mental health, and a variety of other factors. And vitamin D is not the only phototropic product that we make. So, in response to sun exposure, we're also secreting things that help with blood pressure, things that help with sexual health, and certainly with mental health and circadian rhythm health. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not just something we can supplement away and be like, okay, problem solved. We took a vitamin
Mm-hmm.
D supplement and now we don't need the sun anymore. Even when we do that, we're not perfectly repleting vitamin D in the same way that we would from sun exposure. So I think it just has to be approached with nuance. And we have to think about our own, how melanated our skin is. That factors into where do we want to land on that series of trade-offs. And then I think there are things that we can do that mitigate some of those risks. Decreasing industrially processed seed and vegetable oils like canola oil in the diet will change how prone we are to getting a sunburn in response to the sun. And I think having low grade exposure to the sun on a chronic basis is also protective, not against aging. Those effects of the
Mm-hmm.
sun, I can't help you. But
Yeah.
in terms of the skin cancer risk, really burn is where you're getting the most potent impact on that risk. And
Mm-hmm.
we are more likely to burn if we are avoiding the sun religiously, slathering on sunblock religiously, and then one day we're at a parade in June or we go on vacation to Mexico, and then suddenly we get a huge sunburn.
Right.
And we've just made ourselves more prone to that sunburn by avoiding the sun the rest of the time. So I think there's even some mitigating protective aspect to having a little low grade exposure, which then also improves our mood and our overall well being. We know that all-cause
Mm-hmm.
mortality is decreased with more sun exposure, or I think the reverse is what was studied, is that avoiding sun increases all-cause mortality. So the story is complicated.
Mm-hmm.
It's so individual. If you have very fair skin and a strong family history of a malignant, like a melanoma skin cancer, I think you would want to really avoid the sun.
Right.
Um, and if you have melanated skin and you live in a very northern latitude and you've never gotten a sunburn in your life, I think it's crazy to think that you need to be religiously wearing sunblock. I think that you stand to benefit more from sun exposure and you stand to be more at risk from avoiding
Mm. Okay, I agree with you.
it.
I really do, because I see people slathering on sunscreen head to toe, and I'm like, no, 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 no. Can you at least give yourself, and again, like an hour, and then maybe put the sunscreen on, but give yourself an hour, because you mentioned all of the benefits. And if I might add one, um, balancing the hormones.
Yes.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh, like we need that. And it does it, and it can help naturally do that by getting sun exposure. I remember when my kids were little and we go to the pool. I mean, all the moms are like slathering it all over their kids. They're like, why don't you put sunscreen on your kids? I'm like, I want them to get the vitamin D. I want them to get the I want them to have sun exposure. And if they were getting sunburned, of course I would put,
Yeah.
stuff on them. But no, no, no. I wanted them to get the sun because I know how important it was. I agree with you.
And it's not to mention that the lotions and the sprays that we
Oh,
use are not
yeah.
free. And whether it's the sprays with their nanoparticles, which I can't imagine are good for our lungs, and they're also getting into our bloodstream, they have endocrine disrupting properties, and many of them have carcinogenic properties.
Yeah.
It's just all part of the trade offs. I love a hat. I love a physical blocker that doesn't come with any absorption of an endocrine disruptor or carcinogenic compound.
Which I don't think people know that either about the
Yeah.
sunscreens, and there are, thank goodness, more and more sunscreens now out there that are natural, pure zinc, like something that's much better for you than all the added chemicals and the spray on stuff. I'm like, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
And again, people use them and they're not anxious within 10 minutes. So there's not a correlation like, hey, it might be the sunscreen I'm putting on. So just be mindful of that, everybody. There are some all natural sunscreens that work just as well without all the additives, the extra stuff that it disrupts hormone balance and so many things. So, all
Yeah.
right, last question for you.
Yes.
What's your take on body positivity?
Okay, we're going for it.
We're going for it today.
Okay. So I'm a work in progress on this theory. Let me see if I can articulate it well in a way that I never mean to upset anyone or trigger anybody with these views, but it's a delicate topic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I think that there is a tension right now between the sort of toxic diet culture, wellness industrial complex, which I'm squarely a part of, where we tend towards orthorexia, a sort of obsession with eating in the right way. And then there's been this interesting swing in the other direction, which I think comes from such a feeling of empowerment. It's the right spirit. It's a reclamation which
Mhm.
says, I'm done with this. I'm not going to make myself small. I'm not going to starve. I'm not going to please the patriarchal gaze. I'm not going to think of myself as broken. I'm not going to obsess around meal prep or miss out on the joys and pleasures of life. And it's what we call
Mhm.
diet body positivity. And it's also,
Mm.
I'm not going to think that there's anything wrong with my body. I love
Mm.
Sonia Renee Taylor's book, and the title, most of all, I think it's My Body Is Not an Apology.
Ooh, I like
And
that.
I think that to just recognize that we are not inherently broken, even though we come in all these different shapes and sizes. The spirit of all of this, I'm so on board with. I think that the execution of it is sometimes, as my colleague Elise put it so well, she said, so I swung in the other direction and I just started eating like a teenager. And I think that we've run from one patriarchy that tells us be a size 4 and
Mm.
diet and be obsessed around food. And we actually unwittingly ran right into the arms of a different patriarchy that is selling us hyper palatable addictive foods and saying, come on over here, treat yourself, celebrate your body in any way, shape, or form. And some people, their body really does want to be a different, a bigger size. I think in my own experience, I swung too far in the other direction and I was sick. And I
Mhm.
developed polycystic ovary syndrome and ocular migraines. And I couldn't get my period and I couldn't poop to save my life. And I had joint pain.
Mm.
And I think that I was addicted to processed foods.
Mm.
So I think that we just need to reframe the whole conversation where
Mhm.
this was never about us in relationship to somebody else, not to a fat shaming doctor, not to a patriarchal gaze telling us that we need to be thin. This was always meant to be a journey of self love, radical
Mhm.
self love, where we choose food based on how do I show this body respect and how do I nourish it from a place of love. And I think that we're living in a world that's full of landmines because our food is engineered to be hyperpalatable. And I
Mhm.
actually think that that hyperpalatability of our processed foods is the original common root of both the orthorexia diet, toxic diet culture movement, and even the more problematic aspects of a free for all with food. Because I think
Mhm.
both are very understandable human responses to feeling out of control in our relationship to food. And I think that out of controlness comes from food engineered to be addictive. And so some people
Mhm.
run in this direction and say, well, let me get really intentional about how I'm feeding myself. Let me abstain and eliminate the foods that I'm addicted to. Let me eat whole and real foods. Let me eat clean. And that's one attempt to get back into control. And I think that someone else says, I'm done with this battle with my body and with my cravings. I'm going to say, F it. I'm just going to do
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
And I think that if we lived in a world where what was on offer were real foods, you can't go wrong with that mentality. But we live in a world where what is on offer are highly inflammatory, metabolically deranging, hyperpalatable, addictive foods. And I think that mentality takes us sometimes into a place where we didn't want to suffer with diet culture, but we end up suffering with poor health. And I'm
Yeah.
not equating being overweight with poor health. That's not what I'm saying. I'm
Mhm.
equating so much effect of these processed foods on how that affects our physical bodies with poor health. And that can create physical discomfort, but also quite a lot of mental health issues. So, in a nutshell, that's where I stand on body positivity. And I
Mm.
hope that that is well met and that that can give somebody some insight into how they build back a through line to navigating the food landscape from a place of radical self love.
I mean, you can't go wrong with self-love.
Can't go wrong with self love.
I mean, the premise of I mean, everything you just said is around self-love. So I don't know how that's a negative in any way, shape, or form. It's really sad to me that here in the United States, our food is so different from other countries. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because my brother-in-law has a true like I have an intolerance to gluten. I don't feel good on it. He gets really sick on it. Yet when he goes to Italy, he can travel and eat pasta and have pizza for 2 weeks straight and has no problem. Here, he has a slice of pizza and he's in bad shape.
Yeah.
And I remember when my children were small, so a very long time ago, I was researching because I wanted them to eat cleaner. And I was researching, like, I mean, I'm a label junkie. I'm always looking at labels. If I can't pronounce it, it's not going in my body or their body. But I remember looking at things like, I mean, even little snack foods for kids. I'm like, what the heck is all this crap that's in here? And then you look at the same product in another country and it's clean. Why here in the United States do we have to really put so many additives and preservatives in our food, in the processed kind of food is what I'm talking about. I remember one of my friends was saying, oh yeah, the mac and cheese here, like let's just say like Kraft mac and cheese has, food coloring and all this stuff, but you go to like England and it's like colored with paprika. And it's like, it's natural and it's, a pasta, cheese, and paprika to give it a brighter color. And that's it, something like that. I thought, what the heck is going on? So it's hard for us here in this country, unfortunately.
Yeah. We have really sold out. There are still some residual traditional food cultures in other places and a little bit of a healthier agribusiness and a little bit less lobby interest and influence on the government. And here we've fully sold out. And we've almost pushed loveless food business, which is working hand in hand with the pharmaceutical industry, to its logical extreme, where what we've really done is we've created a very addicted, sick population of excellent customers for both processed foods and pharmaceuticals. So it's really, I think, driven by greed. And it has left us all sick. So I would love for this to not have to be an issue of personal responsibility, but I don't see a different path just yet until we have sweeping governmental changes in policy. For now, it has to be up to us to navigate this food landscape and recognize that we're walking through a minefield and we have to feed ourselves real food grown with integrity, with transparency of ingredients. And it's not what's at the eye level shelf in the grocery store.
No. It's over in the produce section, or it's on the outside of the grocery store, as they say, right?
Yeah, or at the farm.
Yeah. At the farm.
Yeah.
So true. And so sad. It's just, gosh, my sister and I were in Honduras, probably, I don't know, 10 or so years ago for a retreat. And it was like a very rustic, extremely rustic, personal work sort of retreat. And I remember that it was a lovely place, but they were serving us dinner one night and I was like, what is this? It's delicious. They said it's chicken. And I was like, that's chicken? I was like, I don't think I've ever tasted chicken like that before. It didn't taste like our chicken in the United States. And then we're eating outside. It was lovely. Again, extremely rustic, but it was lovely because there were flowers and beautiful trees and there were chickens wandering around and they go, that was your dinner. This is your dinner. And I was like, oh, and I realized I've never had that sort of, I always eat organic or free range or something, but this was a whole new level. It did not taste like what we have here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's
crazy.
Exactly right.
So anyway, well, Ellen, this was just so good, enlightening. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you for your book. And thank you for all of your work on anxiety and all of the holistic work that you're doing in the world, because we need to clone you. Many other psychiatrists out there in the world doing this work, because when you have someone that is has a more functional medicine approach, it really is going after that root. What is the core reason for X, Y, and Z? And you're doing that, and you're doing it with anxiety and many other things, I can tell. So I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing in the world. We need you.
Michelle, right back at you. And thank you for having me on today.
Of course. Where would people find you, etc.? Tell us.
So my life's work condensed into 250 pages is my book, The Anatomy of Anxiety. And I'm fairly active on Instagram. I'm at Vora, MD.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here again.
Thank you.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that show. I think she is a wealth of information. And I love, love, love that she takes a functional medicine approach to mental health. This is all about finding the root cause of what's going on within us. So, and I want to remind you again, something that I have found that is the root cause to so much of our suffering is self-worth. So this is why, again, I've created this beautiful resource of meditations and journaling prompts that target self-worth and building an inner self-worth. So you can check that out at theadultchair.com/worthy. And that's all I've got for you guys. I will see you next week, seated right here in the adult chair.